I was born in 1943 in Columbus, Ohio. My parents immigrated to the United States from Lithuania. My father probably in the early 1920s, and my mother after the First World War in the late 20s, early 1930s. So they lived in Columbus, Ohio, and that's where I was born and lived there and went to school there until the age of 14. Actually, into the age of 11, sorry. When I was 11 years old, my father, who had died when I was 4.5, my mother was left by herself and went to visit friends in Newark, New Jersey, just outside of New York, and found a person to hook up with. She got married, and we moved when I was 11 to Newark, New Jersey, and I lived there until I was 14. Went to school, started high school. I had a band, played the trumpet at the time, so I had a band in high school and was on the baseball team and things that you can associate with also. So when I was 14, the family, which consisted of my mother, my brother, and myself, decided to make a trip to Israel to see my mother's part of the family and my late father's part of the family, who had immigrated to Israel from Europe much earlier. In fact, my mother's sister, my aunt, was one of the founders of Kibbutz Yagur near Haifa. And so we went to Israel for a visit, theoretically. After a month in Israel, a mother said, "That's it, we're staying here." And it was a surprise to myself and my brother. And mother, being a unmarried sole provider in Israel at that time, did not feel that she could work a full-time job and also have two teenage children in the house. My brother was younger than me by 3.5 years. He has since passed away. So mother looked for a place that we could go to school, and being of, I guess, the more progressive American women's organizations at the time, like Hadassah and so forth, mother decided that we should be in a kibbutz and looked for a kibbutz that fit her idea of what kind of education her kids should have. She had some friends from the old country, from Lithuania, who were situated in 3 kibbutzim in the north of Israel. The first was Merchavia, near Afula. The second was Sarid, at the edge of the Emek Yisrael. And the third was Kibbutz Mizrah. And we finally found ourselves, my brother and I, as what's called Yildei Chutz, or outside kids, in the kibbutz, in Kibbutz Mizrah. So in 1957, that was 1957, I became
So, Jeff, if I could just stop you for a second. No, you're doing great. I just wanted to get a sense of how was Israel on the family radar? Was it something that had been talked about? Did you expect at that age to be, obviously it was a surprise to move there, but was it completely out of the blue, or was it something?
It was completely out of the blue, Mitch. We were not observant Jewish family, more than at the time, I would say conservative Jewish organizations in the United States at the time. And it was not on my radar. It wasn't on mother's radar that we would actually pick up and move to Israel. And that decision was made while we were there. So it was a big surprise.
were you pleased with this surprise or horrified or something in between?
At first, I was not pleased at all. I had a social life in the United States. Like I said, I was just started high school. I finished my first year in high school, and I had a lot of friends, sports, activities. We lived in what was at the time a fairly Jewish portion of Newark, New Jersey. So there were social things, and mother was married to Sam, my stepfather, and I had no inkling that this was going to happen. Looking back, it probably was something that mother had thought about, certainly separating from Sam, my stepfather at the time, but I don't think she actually formulated in the idea of moving to Israel on a permanent basis.
Mhm. And Sam, what happened there? Was that just they drifted apart, or what happened
They
there?
drifted apart. He was a difficult gentleman. They drifted apart and decided, I guess the moving was part of the decision on my mother's part of how to end that relationship.
Okay, I see. So then you you and your brother, who was how many years younger did you say?
3.5 years younger.
Moved to the kibbutz.
We moved to the kibbutz and were adopted by a kibbutz family for, as was the custom at the time for kids who were part of the kibbutz society whose parents were not in the kibbutz. And both my brother Les and myself started, were integrated into the school system there. I repeated my first year in high school since I was young, and he and I did not know a word of Hebrew. I mean, we knew enough to have a bar mitzvah and to recite the Haftorah by rote, but not a knowledge of Hebrew. So it was important to me that at least I catch up from the study standpoint, repeating that first year.
Was there a Bet Yiladim, a children's house in Mizrah at the time?
There were children's houses, and each class had its own building. Each age group had its own building, which included a schoolroom, a classroom, which the teachers rotated in and out of, and the kids stayed in. So it was the Kibbutz Mizrah was part of the Mapam political movement, political organization at the time. So we had co-ed living quarters. There were 4 of us to a room, two boys and 2 girls, and nobody saw anything untoward with that. So it was quite a shock for this young American boy who grew up differently to experience.
And how did you feel? Like, did you feel like you were welcomed, or?
I was very welcomed. I was very welcomed. I felt then, and I feel now, that I integrated exceptionally well into the kibbutz society. It was important to me to be part of the group, which is a mainstay of kibbutz life. And my brother, not so much. He spent only 2 years in the kibbutz and then went back to Tel Aviv to live with our mother and go to school in Tel Aviv.
And so you preferred to stay if you had the choice?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I stayed in the kibbutz, and after high school, I was accepted.
But hold on, before we get to the Air Force, just want to check. So the kibbutz, I'm assuming, obviously at the time, it was an actual kibbutz where everything was shared. You were okay, basically, going from being an American child to having no real possessions of your own, sort of, your name in the laundry, your number in the laundry, and other people's clothing and all that.
That's right. It didn't seem wrong to me, the sharing part and the not having any personal, theoretically not having any personal items. It was a wonderful way of life for me, for a young man growing up. It was very, I was part of Hashomer Hatzair, which was the Mapam youth movement at the time. Everything to me, the work ethics, the studies, the camaraderie, the feeling of belonging to something that's bigger than yourself, nationalism was very important. And that was certainly part of the kibbutz way of life.
If you think about, like, we try and describe to our listeners, if you think about the kibbutz in those years, like either whether it be a specific site or a smell, is there, how would you, if you try and go like search back in your mind?
One of the things that seemed to resonate with what you said, your question, I was on the kibbutz basketball team. So the kibbutz Mizra was part of the, which was at the part of the league, which was at the time the premier league in Israel. And we played teams like Maccabi Tel Aviv and so forth, but other kibbutzim. So that whole feeling of being part of a group and incorporating sports into that was something that I hold quite dear.
Great. Did you do any kind of agricultural work?
Oh yeah, I was worked in the orchards in the Matayim. Work for high school students was 3 hours a day, after class every day for 6 days. At the time, Friday was not a holiday in Israel at the time. So it was 6 days a week. We went to school and until noon or 1 o'clock, and then worked from 2 to 5 in the wherever you were assigned by the kibbutz to work. And I was usually assigned in the orchards, cultivating trees and driving a tractor, and that was a big deal. Yeah, that was fun.
If you could drive a tractor, it probably bodes well for your ability to fly a plane almost, no?
Driving a tractor, yeah. Backing up with a tractor with a wagon attached is an art, yeah.
Yeah, it's one I have never mastered. What sort of orchards? What did they grow? Do you remember?
Mizra had grapes, which were part of that. They also had apples, pears, plums. And yeah, that was about it.
Very hot, Jeff, no?
Hot, not so much.
Yes, not so bad at Mizra?
No, the Jezreel Valley is not Beit Sha'an, so it wasn't that hot. It was hot. It was dusty. It was work that appealed to me both from a kibbutz standpoint of contributing to the collective or to the organization, doing my share. And also from a technical standpoint, mastering, as you said, driving tractors, cultivating, spraying the crops, and so forth.
Okay. So then you finished high school, and the Army was, I guess, the next stage, or was there something in between?
Yeah, the Army was the next stage. Before we get there, this being part of working in the fields gave me, in my mind, the ability to say during my Air Force service that I was a farmer at heart. So in teaching other pilots how to fly, I would always use what I call the agricultural approach, which was how to make things simple and not complicated, so it'd be better understood. So yeah, so after high school, I volunteered for the Israeli Air Force. I was accepted. I, of course, went through the selection process and went to flight school in 1960.
Where was that then? Was that at Tel
So
Nof, or where was that?
That at that time it was in Tel Nof. It wasn't moved to Hatzarim to 1966, end of 66, beginning of 67. So my Air Force pilot training was in Tel Nof. I flew initially Piper Cubs, which was the selection process, one of the selection process airplanes for just pre-course indoctrination. And then flew the airplanes that were in the Air Force at the time, the Fuga Magister, primarily for training.
Mm-hmm. And how was that also for you a pretty easy acclimatization into the military, or how did that go?
Looking back at it, it was easy, but however, I did not feel it was easy at the time. We started the course 107 cadets, and we finished, my course finished 7. So there was
my God.
a huge fallout during the course. Most of it, of course, in the beginning, and fewer towards the end. But I always had a fear of being washed out. However, my classmates looked at that and laughed because flying was always easy for me. Part of what bothered me was still some of the language, since Hebrew was not my mother tongue, and I had to learn in the kibbutz in high school, and always felt that there were things that were in the language that were didn't come as easily to others. Both remembering. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to ask, did you feel any sort of bias or anything like that as a foreigner or as a newcomer, or any sentiment like that?
No, not anything negative. If anything, my knowledge of English and my abilities, my ability to fly airplanes put me pretty much outside of any kind of controversy or anything. I actually finished the flight school in 1963 as the Chanich Mitzdayen, or the outstanding student in my class. Class was only 7, but that's fine.
And from there?
Well, my Air Force career went probably as fast and as successful as anybody at the time. So I finished my training in the school. I got my wings, pinned on my wings in 1963, and went for, at that time, the Air Force was using 4-month periods of the year as sort of I'm not sure of the word. I'm searching for
sort of like, yeah, like they
it's like a semester.
3 times a year, like 3.
Yeah, right. It was like a semester. Yeah. So I spent the first 4 months after training learning to be an operational pilot on the French Ouragan, which was one of the first French jet airplanes. And first of all, I was selected to go through the combat course, which at the time was all of the pilots wanted to go there, and not everybody was selected for that.
I think they still do, Jeff.
They still do. I think in today's world, it's probably looked at quite differently. There's at the time, it was sort of a bit of an elitist to be a combat pilot, as opposed to flying helicopters or light airplanes or such. But I think with the technology today, things have probably switched a little bit.
Not
Yeah.
that much.
No, man. So I spent 4 months flying the Oregon, and then was transferred to Super Mystère Squadron, which was the first French jet airplane that could go supersonic in level flight. And I spent a year in that squadron. After the first 4 months, I was fully combat ready in that Super Mystère Squadron, and participated in my first military combat activity in 1964, when in Syria, the Syrians were trying to divert the source of the Yarden, the Jordan River, the Yarmouk, and Israel was, the Air Force tried to convince the Syrians that was not a good idea. After a year in the Super Mystère, I was
Wait,
fortunate.
so what was your mission on that first operational sortie?
I bombed a bulldozer that was trying to push the river the other direction.
Okay.
Yeah. After a year, I was assigned to the Mirage 3 squadron, Mirage 3 being the designation of the airplane. And that was a great honor. The Mirage was, at the time, this was 1965, end of 64, beginning 65. The Mirage was the foremost fighter in the Israeli Air Force. And it was a great both honor and accomplishment for me to be assigned to serve in that squadron. And for a few months at least, I was the youngest Mirage pilot in the country. So I flew Mirage aircraft from 1960, end of 64, for 2 years. And then I went, as almost all fighter pilots at the time went, to be an instructor pilot in the flight school, still having reserve or emergency duty in the Mirage Squadron. So I was assigned to the flight school, which was at the time in Tel Nof, flying the Fuga Magister. And initially, I was in one of the more basic training parts of the flight school curriculum, which was also about a 2-year program at the time. Until after, I think it was, if I recall correctly, after either 4 or 8 months, I was assigned to be the commander of the instructor training part of the flight school. When a pilot came to the flight school, they went first, for the first period of time, they were learned how to be instructors. So that was my task. I commanded that part of the flight school organization.
This is just out of my curiosity, really, Jeff, but I'm just wondering, as somebody who was teaching people to fly, and I presume like keeping a close watch on the other, on the cadets, beyond pure skill in flying an aircraft, were there other specific, personality traits or something like that that you remember looking for, or cherishing?
It's a good question. Being a proficient pilot is not in and of itself enough to be a good instructor. Being able to relate to other people, to see their problem areas, to be able to understand different problems that someone else may have that you yourself may not have an issue with, and coaching them along there. Plus, instilling the correct methodology of teaching. As you can imagine, with a 10% pass rate in the school, the flight school was not as efficient as it needed to be. It's very costly to start 100 and finish 10 pilots. There's a lot of investment going on along the way. So we tried to understand how to better do the selection process, both initial selection and during the course itself in the beginning, to try to get up to a much higher percentage of pass rate. And that was more of a theoretical and psychological issue than actual flying itself.
But what about in the cadets themselves? I mean, was there certain, I ask because later on, I was so impressed by the way that you all handled yourself to a large extent. And I just wonder if already at the early stage, there's certain things that you're looking for beyond, the obvious things about coordination and ability to fly.
The Air Force is very much about being a team player, being able to understand the situation that you're in and be able to incorporate things around you. And it's very much not a single person doing the job. So teamwork and being able to understand the situation and able to communicate that to other people was part of what a flight cadet needs to learn. And I'm sure today it's even more so.
Okay, so we're back. Let's go back to where we were. You were an instructor. You're in fact the head instructor, I think, in the flight school, and you're flying. Are you flying operational? This is mid 60s now, 65, something like that.
Yes. I'm continuing to fly as is the custom that instructors in flight school have their own squadron that they report to on a. At the time, it was as much as you can basis, given your workload as a flight instructor with cadets. So you would, and the distances weren't too bad, certainly at the time. So from Tel Nof, my operational squadron was in Hatzor, which was only a 15-minute drive away. So it wasn't a problem for me to hop over and fly a sortie with my operational squadron. A lot of the sorties were night sorties because that was the easy time. Most of the instruction was daytime. And so flying night was a way to finish the day on an upbeat. Yeah.
That sounds like a pretty hard job. So you're working all day and then at night you're operational. Okay.
More or less. It's not as clear cut as that, but yeah. So it was. You had a minimum number of sorties in your operational squadron that you had to complete in order to maintain proficiency, and it was most pilots were able to easily meet that requirement.
Okay. So where shall we fast forward to the start of the 6-Day War?
So yeah, we can do that. It's not so
Or are you,
fast.
no,
Uh,
you tell you can go ahead, whatever.
yeah, so I
Takes-
was at the time I was in the flight school and reported to my operational squadron, Mirage Squadron, and of course participated in the 1967 Six-Day War as a Mirage pilot. Um,
You remember, by the way, I know that for many people in Israel, it was a time of great tension, like the weeks leading up to the war. Do you remember that? Were you party to that?
um, I think our mindset was that there will be a war, um, given what was going on politically, especially with Egypt at the time, all the activity that happened in the southern area was to us an indication that something is going to break out. So I don't think it was a huge surprise. The actual timing, of course, was something that not everybody knew. But the fact that something had to happen, I think, was felt within the Air Force for months leading up to the war itself.
I know that a lot of civilians were really quite nervous in those weeks. Was that something that you felt as a pilot? Because I know later the pilots were, of course, instrumental to the swift victory.
I don't recall ever being nervous about the ability of the Air Force and of the military and of the country itself to survive. I was pretty sure with having done all of the preparation, the training flights, the operational exercises that we had completed, that if something were to happen, it would be a quite decisive victory. However, you never think about what might happen to you personally. I mean, you can think about it, but for most, I guess, soldiers, for airmen, for sure, there has to be a certain feeling of competence and belief in what you're doing that doesn't allow in the feeling of defeat. So it's not a superiority thing. It's more of a competency and belief in your training. So that was permeated throughout the Air Force at the time, for sure. So I wasn't concerned on a national level of what might happen, and never thought on a personal level that I might get killed. It just seemed to be something that I did not dwell on personally. There may have been others that were more apprehensive or fearful. It didn't show up, though.
And so what did you do during the war? Did you shoot down any other planes? Did you go on a lot of bombing runs? What did you do?
Most of the flying was taking out the other air forces, the surrounding air forces, while they were on the ground. There was not too much, I'd say opportunity is the right word, of air-to-air combat, even though the airplane I was flying was the primary air combat airplane in the Air Force. During the 1967 war, I never saw an enemy airplane. I looked for them pretty hard, but I never encountered any. There were others that did. So
you saw them on the ground, though, right?
I saw them on the ground in various states of destruction. Yeah, bombed the airfields and attacked the airplanes while they were on the ground, which is a more efficient way of doing battle. And that was part of the great plan.
And do you remember your feelings? I mean, I know there was in some parts of the country euphoria after the war. Do you remember your own feelings?
Certainly not euphoria. I had lost friends in my squadron and other squadrons who didn't come back from their sorties. It was you had a feeling, I had a feeling of satisfaction in having done a job and protecting the country. I didn't feel happy about it was somewhat overshadowed by the loss of friends, personal friends and squadron mates and other squadron personnel as well, especially in the Air Force, of course. So I never saw it as a time for rejoicing.
And okay, so just where were you living at an Air Force base then? What were you? Did you?
Yes, yes, I was. I was living on base.
Married?
Yes, I was married at the time, and we were living on an Air Force base, and the families were taken out of the base, moved out during the war itself. Certainly, the first part to somewhere in the other part of the country, a safer place. After the, 7 days is not. If we look at the wars today and what's happening in Ukraine, so a 6-day war is, you can be separated from your family for a while.
Right. But otherwise you saw them daily.
Yes.
Okay. And how was life on the base? Was that sort of like a little bit like the kibbutz, or how would you characterize it?
In my mind, it was. That's sort of like a good comparison. There was a lot of social interaction between the families, especially within the same squadron. There were more than one squadron on the base, and there were social activities that were for families. Almost everything that happened included the family members themselves.
Okay. And so what did you do after that? I mean, did the war of attrition start then almost immediately after that, I suppose, after the famous 3 no's?
Yeah, the war of attrition, I think, started almost immediately after the 6-day war. Probably in the books, it's more like a year later, but it's very close to that. So I went back to my job in the flight school as an instructor, and I flew also with the aerobatic team at the time. So I was flying. I think there were days when I would fly a aerobatic practice sortie before work. So at 5 a.m, we'd go fly, and then I would fly 3 flights with students or instructors during the day, and then in the afternoon, do another practice aerobatic flight. So it was a lot of flying. It was very intensive, but I enjoyed flying so much that I didn't see it as being work at all.
Can we say a word or two about your love of flying, what it is that you love? You can try and convey it to the listener.
It's a sense of freedom, a sense of being one with a machine that it gave me a feeling of being, I don't know how to describe it. It's a difficult one to describe when you haven't experienced it. It's like if you were to read a really good book, you have a feeling of satisfaction after you read it and you understood things. And so to me, the technical aspects of flying, perfecting maneuvers, trying to be, the Air Force was very competitive. It always is. And certainly within a squadron, one of the methods of bettering a pilot's ability is to make things a competition. Some people are better at competing than others. I always was able to fly airplanes naturally. I didn't have to think about what I'm doing. And that is same as if you think about operating any other machinery, that you drive your car, you don't really think about what's the fact that you're pressing on the gas or changing gears or what the car is doing. It's a sense of being one with the machine. And the machine being an amazing instrument. So being able to fly naturally, people call others natural pilots. And what they mean by that, I think, is that the pilot doesn't have to think about what they're doing in the airplane to make the airplane do what it needs to do. And that was always my own personal ability. And that gives an advantage in, for example, being able to hit the target best among your colleagues, to get higher scores in marksmanship, or to even be a better fighter pilot in if you don't have to think about what you're doing with the machine, you can think about the other things that are happening around you and incorporate that information. So that's what I always loved about flying.
Great, thank you. Okay. So at some point they chose you to be one of the first pilots to fly the Phantom. Is that pretty much what we're up to now?
Yeah. So in the end of 1968, after the Six-Day War, the French put an arms embargo on Israel, and so there were no more French airplanes coming, and Israel turned to the United States. I think Israel always wanted to have American airplanes, but they were much more expensive. And I think there were political issues, but after the Six-Day War and the French embargo, the US agreed to sell Israel combat aircraft. First, there was the Skyhawk, the A4, and then pretty close after that, the Phantom, the F4, which was a very big deal. The F4 was the primary fighter in the American Air Force, the US Air Force, with history, already a history in the war in Vietnam. And it was a major technology shift from the French airplane concepts. The US Air Force airplanes were much more systems oriented than the French airplanes at the time. The French airplanes were pretty simplistic. You had a cannon, and at best you might have an air-to-air missile that might or might not work. But it was basically still the era of the dogfight, the individual fighting airplane. And the US concept was very much of a systems-based airplane, where the pilot was part of that system, but not it was the most important, certainly, but not the only part. So there were, once the US agreed to sell the F-4 to Israel, 10 aircrew members were selected to go and be the first to learn this airplane, to train on the airplane, and to come back to Israel and form the first 2 F-4 squadrons. So the Israeli Air Force picked 6 pilots and 4 navigators. I was the youngest pilot picked for that. And we all had sort of knew what we were going to do in the squadrons that were formed in Israel. And the US Air Force had a slightly different idea of how to manage these 10 Israelis. The US Air Force needed to pair us up into pairs, so each pilot would have a navigator to fly with. So 6 and 4 doesn't do that. So it was decided that I would go to the US to study as a navigator, as a backseat crew member. It was sort of, well, I want to be a pilot. I don't want to be a navigator. I don't want to be a backseater. I want to be the person who has the controls. So I like to think that I made a deal with the commander of the Air Force at the time. And I said, okay, I'm willing to go and do backseat, which turned out a good decision for everybody. Because most of the systems in an airplane are operated by the backseat pilot, a backseat air crew. So in order to learn the radar, the weapon delivery system, the navigation system, and so forth, there was a lot of training that was given the backseaters that was not given to the pilots by the US Air Force. So I went to the States as a backseater. And with the stipulation that I would get a front seat checkout before we returned to Israel, in order to then become the second in command of the first F-4 squadron, which worked out very well. So we went and spent almost a year in the United States. The backseaters went for 4 months or so to, first of all, everybody had to go to learn English, even though you couldn't get a pass from the US Air Force. You had to attend the US Air Force, the US Military Language School in Lackland, Texas, which interestingly had students from many, many different countries, including the Arab countries around Israel. So we jokingly said that the US Air Force is training the world how to fight each other, the rest of the world. So we went and
was there any collegiality between any of you Israelis and any of the Arabs, or you just kept distance?
We kept to ourselves, and the group, both the group of 4, or with myself, 5 backseat air crew who went initially, and the group of 5 pilots who went, concentrated so much on learning as much as they could, absorbing this new philosophy of aircraft design and systems. I don't think we even had time to socialize much, and certainly nobody thought it was smart to socialize with other potentially enemy countries. So no. So we went and did English, and then we went to a different base in Davis-Monthan for backseat training on systems.
Where's that? Where is that, Davis-Monthan?
In Arizona.
Could you say that part about talking to other countries. The phone started ringing at that point.
Oh,
so.
sorry. I think primarily because we were so involved in absorbing the training and the information, we didn't really have time to socialize with other trainees there from different countries, and no one thought it smart to do that with potential enemy countries either.
Right.
We sort of stuck to ourselves.
Okay. I assume you did well in the English lessons?
I did okay in the English lessons. I couldn't get a pass from the American air attaché in Tel Aviv at the time to not do English training. So
Yeah, well, they're not always that flexible in the American, right? Anyway, so then
so after we
did
studied.
you travel alone? Were you just pilots, or did everybody come with their families, or how did you do that?
Initially, we were by ourselves for
Okay.
the first part of the English training, English language course. And then the families joined us. So my family joined me in Davis-Monthan originally, where we studied for 4 months. And then the pilots joined the group. The front seat pilots joined the group, and we were all in a George Air Force Base, which is today Victorville, which is right outside of Los Angeles, California. So that was a major training base for F-4 pilots for the U.S. Air Force. So we spent 4 months there training, going through the U.S. Air Force training syllabus, flying mostly as pairs with the front and back seat pilots flying in the same airplane, and sometimes we flew with American instructors in the airplane, but mostly they were flying alongside the Israelis and either trying. It's a method of teaching that may seem somewhat odd to the outsider, but very often you train in the airplane, you're flying without an instructor, and it certainly, if it's a single seat airplane, you have no instructor with you, and that seemed to be the way the U.S. Air Force was training at the time. So we spent 4 months there with the families, and then went back to Israel and waited for the airplanes to show up. While we were forming all of the functions of a full-up squadron.
Okay. How did the kids do well there? How did you feel as an American coming back? I'm just asking out of curiosity.
Coming back to Israel or
to
the
coming
US?
To the US, yeah.
I always felt at home in the US. I guess knowing the language and the slang and the acclimating to the US way of the military way of life in the US was not a problem for me. It seemed quite natural. And I think most of it was due to the language ability.
Okay. And
so then we're coming to Israel, started using the F-4 in the war of attrition. Very soon after the airplanes arrived in the country. They arrived in September of '69. And shortly thereafter, the first squadron became operational, meaning that they were fully combat ready, and started to participate in what is called the war of attrition, primarily doing longer range bombing sorties because of the abilities of the F-4 versus the other airplanes. We could go further and carry much, much more ammunition, ordnance than the French airplanes could. So I did that. We did that. It was a difficult time. There was a war going on, but we were also forming new squadrons and trying to teach new pilots and navigators, backseaters, the airplane, and to do training sorties. So it was a time where I remember certainly days where I would fly 2 training sorties in the morning and then do an operational bombing sortie somewhere in the afternoon. The one thing that sticks in my mind from that, we had a visit. Of course, everybody wanted to visit the new formed Phantom squadrons from the press, from the government. So we had visitors all the time. And one time we had a visit from Israel television. The interview was a gentleman I'm sure you've heard of by the name of Dan Shilon. So he came to the squadron, and of course, whatever pictures they were allowed to take and talk with the pilots about how it is. And the question was, what do you think about this war that you're going out and flying combat missions and the rest of the country is sipping coffee in the Tel Aviv restaurants at the same time? And I think the answer that we debate who said it, but the answer that was given was that that's the reason that we're doing this, so that other people can be at peace in Tel Aviv. We need to do these combat actions so that the country can still function as a normal civilian country.
Okay. Should we maybe zoom in on, are you ready to zoom in on the day that you took off for the?
Oh yeah. So June 30th, 1970, I flew 2 sorties that morning, training sorties with the student pilot. And later, either earlier that day or previous evening, there had been a reconnaissance mission in the Suez Canal area, and it was observed that the Egyptian, with help of the Russian military, were moving ground-to-air missile batteries closer to the Suez Canal. Part of the war of attrition, a major part, was trying to maintain the ability to have air superiority over the whole of Sinai, including the Suez Canal. So most of our targets were ground-to-air missile batteries that were brought to Egypt by, given to Egypt by Russia, and were tried to put in place near the canal to not allow Israeli airplanes to fly there safely. So it was found that there was a certain area that one of the batteries was in place that we didn't know about before, or was very quickly moved. And so there was a mission formulated to try to bomb this ground-to-air missile battery that same night, as soon as possible. And we had been, of course, flying combat missions for the last 7 or 8 months, and had seen many ground-to-air missiles fired at us before, and were able to evade those using tactics that we developed in Israel. And in any case, so late in the afternoon, I was given the order that we need to attack this missile battery, SAM site, they were called. And there were, I believe, more than one site was discovered, and there were 3 pairs of F4s given the order to attack these targets. So late in the evening, about 6 o'clock or so, the sun is setting in the west. And of course, we're flying west to get to Egypt from Israel. Sun in your eyes. Before we took off, I heard on the radio, on the emergency radio frequency, some words that led me to believe that one of the airplanes that had taken off before us, the attack itself was staggered in time. So there were certain amount of time, and it doesn't take long to get to the Suez Canal from the middle of Israel if you're flying an F4 at almost full speed. You know, you can do the math. You're traveling somewhere around 800, 900 kilometers per hour. So it doesn't take a long time to go those 100 kilometers. So I heard on the radio indication that someone had bailed out of an airplane, ejected out of an airplane, and was being told to try to hide and that perhaps be rescued that evening. So I said to my backseater, well, this is going to be an interesting flight. And we took off, and we maintained radio silence, so we didn't talk to anybody. And all of a sudden, radio silence was broken, and we were told to change our route a little bit. So one good thing about the F4 is you have somebody to talk to while you're flying this mission. You just talk to your backseater. Mm-hmm. So,
Jeff, there was no hesitation or no checking in after you'd heard that bit of radio?
Not at all. We knew we would have to be careful, but we always thought we were being careful. So we changed the plan a little bit, and not going into the actual method of the attack itself. Somewhere before we were able to release our ammunition, our bombs, we saw 2 missiles coming at us, actually from above, which was unusual. Ground-air missiles usually come from the ground and they go up to the airplane. However, they were able to fire these missiles in a way that we did not get a warning that they were fired at the time, and to guide them optically as opposed to having a missile guided on radar by radar, which is one way to know that you've been shot at. You can pick up those radar transmissions as well. So we saw 2 missiles coming at us. I tried to maneuver the airplane, and both missiles exploded near the airplane. The airplane was damaged, but I managed to release my bombs on the target that I was assigned. And now I'm trying to get back east of the Suez Canal with a damaged airplane, trying to see if I can, if I need to bail out of the airplane, that would be in the right place geographically.
Right. So Jeff, how much time elapses between the explosion of these missiles damaging the aircraft and then you stick to your mission and try, nonetheless, your first instinct is to complete the bombing run?
Yeah, it was sort of immediately. We were in a position in the air, diving towards the ground when the missiles exploded, and I had identified the target. I thought I saw the target immediately before the explosions, but I definitely identified them afterwards. And since we're more or less, since we were pointing towards the ground, it was, I had no other thought in my mind other than I'm going to have to release these bombs anyway, so I might as well release them in a controlled manner on the target that I was assigned to.
Got it.
Um,
Okay.
So usually, typically if an airplane is damaged, one of the ways of getting further away is to release all the external ordnance. So I'm flying at about 11,000 feet, as fast as I can, with a damaged airplane. One engine's on fire, and the other engine is what we used to call hiccuping. It's making bad sounds. So I shut down the engine that was on fire and continued with the bad engine that was still working but making bad sounds, and we were trying to find our way east to the past the Suez Canal. At that time, my wingman, who had observed all of this, and he was flying below us, noticed another missile coming at us of a type that wasn't supposed to be in Egypt at the time. Won't go into that. So I said to the backseater, let me know if you see it. And he saw the missile coming. And I said, I'll try to evade this missile, and did some evasive action as much as I could with a damaged airplane. And the missile exploded apparently right next to the airplane and severed the tail section. I know that the tail of the airplane was found separate from the fuselage of the airplane. So now I'm out of control. And I told, amazingly, the communication within the airplane still worked. I still could talk to my backseater. And I told him to prepare to eject, and initiated the ejection sequence. Felt the F4 has two separate canopies. So the backseater's canopy left the airplane, and I saw in the mirror and felt his ejection seat go. And supposedly 3/4 of a second after that, my seat is supposed to fire automatically and to eject me from the front seat. The backseater leaves the airplane first for safety reasons. I won't get into the technical part of that, but you can look it up.
Okay, I could sort of imagine.
Yeah, well, the seat has a rocket motor in it, which fires. So if the front seat rocket motor fires and the seat moves back over the top of the airplane, it could
bang into it.
Injure the backseat pilot. So the backseat pilot crew member was ejected from the airplane, and I'm waiting. And I remember in training, this all went through my mind at the time. I remembered in training that they said that 3/4 of a second can seem like a lifetime. And I remember thinking to myself that if I can think these thoughts, it's much more than 3/4 of a second. So it turned out that my seat was damaged by the explosion of the missiles near the airplane, and it did not function. So making an interesting story shorter, I was able to manually just open the canopy and jump out the side of the airplane, which was spinning in the air, and found myself very, very low, as this took enough time between when I was hit for the third time and ejected. just manually opened the parachute and found myself as a visitor in Egypt.
So the plane dropped in a spiraling, it spiraled down from when you ejected the backseater till you were able, how many?
It
feet did you drop
was
to?
about 10,000 feet, almost 10,000. I remember as we climbed up to do the attack that there were some puffy clouds at about 2,500 feet above the ground. And as the airplane was falling before I managed to get out of it, I saw us go through this layer of clouds. So I was in the air for about a second under the parachute before I hit the ground.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's quite a story, and I later told it during some subsequent training in the U.S. To an old master sergeant who taught pilots how to bail out of airplanes in the safety course, and his first words were, "I'm going to have to teach you guys how to manually bail out of an F4, but it really can't be done." So I raised my hand and I said, "Would you like to bet?" Because I had done it. So I found myself in Egypt. And where do you want to go from here?
Well, I'd like to zoom in if we can. I definitely want to know, even while you were bailing out, if at all you were thinking, I can't believe this is happening to me, or if you were just entirely focused on the, completing every single possible thing you could do to save yourself. And then certainly I want to know, exactly what happened as soon as you hit the ground and who came to you, what happened.
So I found myself on the ground very close to the airplane itself, which was exploding. The ammunition that was still in the gun of the airplane was exploding. And I detached myself from the parachute and started to move away. I knew where east was because the sun was setting in the west. So I say, okay, I'm going to try to get back to the canal area and someone will come and rescue me. Well, it turns out that the airplane fell very close to a very large Egyptian outpost, and they had seen the airplane fall. And very quickly, I noticed a truck full of Egyptian army people driving over the sand dunes in my direction. And well, the somewhat in retrospect humorous side of this was I started to run. They saw me and they came to about the truck drove to about 100 or 200 meters from me, and all the soldiers got out and started shooting at me. And I remember thinking to myself that I'm a pretty good shot with a rifle. I was at the time, and I can't hit a moving target at 200 meters. So I just kept running. And they saw that they're not there, and I heard the bullets and all that, and like in the Western movies. And they got back on their truck and drove again, but again stopped a couple 100 meters from me and started shooting again. And I kept shooting, and finally they figured out that this is not going to work for them, and they kept driving. So as I saw them closing in on me, I had an emergency radio that pilots have to facilitate being rescued. And I was in contact with somebody who answered the radio. And I said, I told them, I can't defeat the whole Egyptian army by myself, so I'm going to have to surrender. And I thought I was going to be killed. So I
did you recognize the voice on the other end, or you just
it was a pilot in a different airplane that was flying for a different mission along the Suez Canal. I don't know who it was, but I know it was a Skyhawk pilot. And so I put this emergency radio on the ground and tried to destroy it with whatever means I had, and raised my hands and was taken as a POW, not in a very nice way. I had suffered quite a bit of burns from the airplane. When the airplane was tumbling through the skies, it was on fire, and as soon as the canopy jettisoned from the backseat pilot, the fire was sucked into the airplane. So I was engulfed in flames. And fortunately, I was wearing the protective clothing that I had. So exposed areas were burnt, and I had other kinds of injuries. So the Egyptians took me as a POW, and not talking about the time it took for me to get there, I finally found myself in a prison in the outskirts of Cairo, in a very dark and dirty cell.
Are you able to, so I assume the people who took you, those were regular Egyptian soldiers who treated you roughly?
Yeah, I think there was an officer among this group of soldiers who finally saved me from being killed, which I had fully expected to happen. Now I can say that in a sort of easygoing way right now, but obviously I was pretty scared and hurting. But this officer moved the other soldiers away and transferred me to another organization which contains some of the Egyptian, I think the Egyptian, I don't know how to call it, but it's probably their intelligence organization. So
was there any part of you, excuse me if this is not, was there any part of you that thought maybe better to just die here than get taken? Or were you utterly certain that
at this point, not yet.
Mhm.
Not until I got to the prison near Cairo. So we'll skip over the bad stuff. I don't really feel that it serves any purpose to tell explicit stories. So with your permission, we'll jump ahead about a year.
We can definitely do that, and I totally understand that you don't want to go into it. I respect that entirely. Is there, without being graphic or going into it, a way to convey, because I know it was a dire situation, is there a way for you to try and convey it to us?
Possibly the best way that I can do is, I believe that there were 3 ways for me to get out of my situation. The first was peace between Israel and Egypt. The second was a war between Israel and Egypt. And the third was a miracle. I stopped believing in miracles after about the first 2 days as a POW, that this is not going to happen. Peace, I didn't think was going to break out between Egypt and Israel after everything that I had seen and known. So my thought there'd have to be a war and a prisoner exchange following the war. There were times during the first period of being a POW due to physical treatments where I would have preferred to be dead. I remember thinking that there was nothing I could do about it, but at the time I didn't think I could, but yeah. So there were at the time 6 Air Force personnel who had been captured. 2 of them the same day as I was. Rami Harpaz and Achika Rayal were flying an F-4, and they're the ones I heard over the radio before I took off, being told to try to hide themselves and they'll be rescued that evening. And then there were 2 other F-4s that were shot down, and the crew was captured. One of the crew members that was captured was in a cell not far from mine, and it was a very young backseater who went through some very hard physical times and was ultimately killed during his interrogation period in Egypt.
Who was that?
It was Goldwasser was his name. I will move to what I think might interest you in addition to this. So we were I was kept in solitary confinement for quite a while, almost a year, and then was united with all the Israeli POWs that were in Egypt at the time in a single room in the same prison facility, I believe. Not sure. So there were 10 of us here in this prison facility, and we tried. Go ahead, ask a question.
Oh, sure. I'd like to zoom in on that as well. The moment that, I know that you knew there were some other Israelis, but if you could just zoom in on that moment and try and explain to us your feeling at seeing friendly faces.
It was, I think, certainly up to that time, it was one of the happiest moments I could imagine, being my blindfold being removed and finding myself in a room with, there were 7 other people at the same time. Others were brought there, the 3 others were brought there after me. And people I had known, I know, except for 3 of them. Well, I knew the Air Force personnel. There were 3 non-Air Force, 4 initially non-Air Force personnel in that same room who had been put together before that, had been united before that. So it was a feeling of great relief. I certainly felt that I now had a chance of getting out of this alive, which I didn't really think that was the case before that. So
had you been in the dark, Jeff? You say remove the blindfold. Was that like a permanent situation?
It was whenever a prisoner was moved from one place to another, they were moved blindfolded.
I see. And so was Rami in the cell when you showed up?
Yes, Rami was in the cell, and there was one other Air Force person in the cell when I showed up, and then others were brought in the same day or the subsequent day after that. So in the end, there were 10 of us, 6 Air Force people and 4 non-Air Force in this cell. And it took us a while to each of us to come to the conclusion that this is going to be probably a long-term situation, and we better make the best of it if we want to survive intact. But it seemed like this was more or less an end to the physical difficulties that we had before that. It didn't seem logical that the physical abuse would continue once we were able to talk to each other. Part of interrogation methodology is keeping persons separate and not being able to coordinate answers or thoughts or questions or anything.
Was it something that you even knew to look forward to, or was it a complete surprise?
It was a complete surprise. I was sure I was going to end up forever in my solitary cell, which I can tell you the exact measurements of.
What are they?
Oh,
What were they?
it was 2 meters by 1 meter. And a very high ceiling.
I think I remember Rami writing about doing a lot of handstands. So I guess.
We did. I did exercise as much as you can. How many, Rami figured out with his analytical mind, figured out how many figure eights he would have to run in this 2 meter cell to run a kilometer or so. Yeah. So I think those of us who found ourselves found different ways of trying to both pass the time and stay as sane as we could.
So, okay, so I know you want to focus more on the after the reunification. So, so you show up, you recognize some of the people. Is it like, are you able to simply embrace the people there and be happy for their company, or is it still nerve-wracking, and are you still nervous about becoming?
I certainly was nervous. I think all of us were, some more, some less, about talking with other people, feeling any degree of safety. Even though you knew the person and you could logically think that things were probably not going to get worse. The fear and the experience of being there as much time as we had and what each of us had gone through, I think, I know permeated that room for months.
And having, read about some of this, it was fascinating to me just to see, before we get into the translation of The Hobbit, which I'm very interested in, but also the way that, did you realize that you would organize yourself in a democratic way as you did, or as military people, did it seem like maybe a military structure made more sense? And do you remember how you came to that decision?
I think all of us very quickly, either mostly from a sense of wanting to be fair, decided that a military structure within our environment was not the best way to keep for everybody to be happy as much as we could. Outwardly, we had a spokesman. Rami was the spokesperson towards the outside world, both to the prison authorities whenever we interacted with them, with our guards, and subsequently with the Red Cross. So we did have that in structure that seemed to be correct, but inwardly, it felt very much that we could not be a dictatorship in the sense of a military rank structure. All of the Air Force people were officers. There were 2 civilians in the room who were captured, and there were 2 Army people who were sergeants at the time. And it just seemed natural, and possibly because of the kibbutz upbringing that a few of us had, that rank doesn't matter in an organization or an environment like this. So it was very much kibbutz that we formed in this, including our Friday night discussions, which we had after lights out on Friday, which is the kibbutz tradition of having a meeting every week in the central hall of all the kibbutz members and democratically voting on issues and thoughts, and everybody has the same right to speak their mind. So we very quickly formed Friday night meetings in our little kibbutz in Egypt, and it seemed to satisfy most of the needs that people had to not feel that they were heard and had a voice, which was true.
Maybe, can you tell me about Rami specifically? Because I know that the 2 of you were very close for many years. You knew him before?
I knew Rami before. We had certainly met. He was from the northern base, and I was in the southern base, so we didn't get together too much. We had interacted quite a bit as part of the delegation to train on the Phantoms in the States. And Rami was a genius in many ways. And I think most of us who were in that room can ascribe their leaving there in one piece to Rami's ability and organizational skills and his compassion.
Amazing. So he was what we would call like a natural born leader?
I think so. I think others think so as well. He had a phenomenal memory. He could be obstinate at times. I remember asking him why does he not have enough tolerance for other people's opinions? And his answer was that, well, look, I'm right 98% of the time. So 2%, it doesn't pay for me to indulge in other people's. But that was figuratively speaking. But he would listen, and he was able to actually, I think, move the group, and not the least because of Menachem Eni, who was also with us. He and Rami did not see eye to eye on many things, but both of them were smart enough to understand that discussion and questioning and not being sure, trying to make sure that decisions are the correct one, are part of a normal democratic society. So even though they disagreed, they were able to, both of them were able to come together on many, many things that benefited the whole group.
Can you describe the room for me as in detail if you can, and also where your where you were, like your bunk was within the room?
The main room was, we called it our villa because it was a separate two-family building in this prison. The room was 6 meters by 6 meters, approximately, more or less, with a high ceiling and some windows that were, at times they were boarded up because whatever prison authority at the time didn't want us to see outside. And we had a outside area that was attached to this room with a very high wall that was about, I think it was 18 meters by 6 meters. So we could, when we were allowed, we could go outside and walk around. There was nothing there except sand, but and a very high wall. There were mostly bunk beds, 2-story beds. That except for Don Abidan, who was severely wounded and was kept a POW until we were all released. He had his own bed because he couldn't climb into a bunk bed or even get into one. So he had his own separate bed.
And where were you?
I was in the bottom bunk of a bed that unfortunately Rami was in the top bunk. It was one room, you know, all of these bunks are connected, but Rami snored terribly. So it was a hardship being under him. I would kick the upper bunk and it would stop for a minute or two and then keep going.
Okay. And so you were, I know you were a reader, right? I mean, were you the one who got the first books to come, or did books come from all over?
So after about a year, we started to have visits from the Red Cross. And as part of that, a part of those visits, they would bring us what the Egyptians allowed through their security system, books and some foods and basically that. I know much more was sent from Israel by the families and by the Israeli military organizations. Not all of it reached us. Some of it was hijacked on the way. But in one of the first few boxes of books that we received, that we're able to get, were all 3 books, Tolkien's trilogy, The Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
And I later on found out that my brother had sent those. He was a great reader. So he sent these books, and I devoured them. And each book that I finished, I gave to the other 3 or 4 English readers in the room. Not everybody was able to read books of that type. And very quickly, Tolkien's trilogy was a perfect book to send to a POW. Very well-defined good and evil, hardships, you know, the good endured many hardships in trying to defeat the evil. And it was a great escape from the physical environment that we were in. So we all read the books and talked about them between ourselves very, very often. The others in the room who were not able to read those books as fluently as we were and to get the understanding and the enjoyment that we got out of them, asked us about these stories, and we started to tell them a little bit in our Friday night meetings. We had story time or something of that nature, where we would tell a part of the book or different things. Reading that, The Lord of the Ring, at least in the first book, mentions the Hobbit quite a bit. And so I asked the Red Cross in their visit to see if we could get a copy of The Hobbit. And the way things moved along, and that we would ask for something, a month later we would get an answer that it's on the way, and 2 months later something might show up. So finally The Hobbit arrived, and we read that. I read it first and then gave it to the others to read. And there were so many questions by the group about The Hobbit that we decided that it would only be fair if we translated it so everybody could enjoy this book.
So the initial English readers were you, Rami, Avinoam, and Menachem?
Yeah, and Amos Zamir to a certain extent as well.
Okay.
And so we decided we're going to translate this book. So how do you translate? First of all, we had to make sure we had a way of writing down the translation, and we were able to obtain notebooks that the Egyptians allowed us to have with some pencils. With anything we got was a battle. We could not get among the things we did, we decided we need to have a school in this room. And so everybody who knew something was going to be a teacher. We had a math teacher. Menachem taught math. Rami taught history and literature, and someone taught some mechanics, and we really wanted a blackboard for this, but we were denied a blackboard because the official reasoning was that we would then design some contraption that would allow us to escape from prison if we had a blackboard. So we didn't have a blackboard.
Were you on board? Were you into this notion of teaching and learning? Was that?
Oh yeah, I taught
evident
English.
to you?
I taught English. We had different levels of English. Of course, in a democratic society, you can't have advanced people and less advanced people. So I taught advanced English and more advanced English. And as much as I ever could teach. So we would read books and talk about meaning of words and such. So we decided we're going to translate The Hobbit. I'm not sure if it was how the idea, where it actually originated. I think Rami and I may have come to this conclusion after trying to explain a passage or something to the rest of the group, but maybe not. Others may have. We know that history is easy to change, so I'm not sure what others may think of this.
But in your memory, it was a result of you and Rami discussing.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So there were 4 of us who worked on this book. And we actually initially wanted to put in the notes of the translation that it was translated by Amir, which was Avi with an Aleph, Menachem, Ani, Yitzchak, me, and Rami. So Amir, Aleph Mem Yud Resh, was going to be the translator of this book. And the way it happened was that Avi and I would go outside when we were allowed into the outside area alone, camp out on the sand next to a wall somewhere. And I would read the book in English and do a simultaneous translation into Hebrew. Avi would write down the Hebrew translation, polishing a little bit, adding some words or asking meaning of things and so forth.
Was that a sentence by sentence?
Oh,
or
yeah.
How did you do that, Jeff? Sentence by sentence?
It was sentence by sentence, and I'll get into it. I'll tell you about it, but being a translator yourself, the actual words are only part of the translation. We very quickly found that Tolkien has a phenomenal use of sounds in his English. If you read The Hobbit and you try to listen to the characters speaking, their words themselves are an indication, seem to be an indication of their character. Golem never says "my precious." He says "my precious," and there's lots of S's and things that are going on. So how do you translate that? Which we found, I think, pretty innovative ways of conveying that. So I would translate to Hebrew simultaneously. Avi would write it and polish it a little bit. And then Rami and Menachem would take what they called Jeff's Hebrew and translate it into real Hebrew. Not being born in Israel and not having, not being a Sabra, I was always the American. So no matter how good my Hebrew was or wasn't, there was always well, you don't really know Hebrew. So the polishing was done in a committee, by a committee. We would take a paragraph or a sentence and try to compare it to the English actual writing, and try to understand if we're able to convey not only the meaning of the words, but the intent in Hebrew, into Hebrew, which was quite a challenge. None of us were authors, none of us were writers, but certainly Menachem and Rami and Avi, to a large degree, had a very rich Hebrew vocabulary. All of us read a lot. Anyway, so it was a major undertaking, and we would tell the story in Hebrew during our Friday night meetings as we progress through the translation. We jokingly said after we finished that we now need to tackle the Lord of the Rings, but that's going to be 5 more years here. When we finished it, probably it took almost 2 years to do it. We struggled on one of our biggest struggles is trying to translate the poems or the rhymes that Tolkien uses in The Hobbit. I remember find it in my book here. The chapter of Riddles in the Dark, where Bilbo and Gollum are riddling each other to try to escape or not be overcome by the other, and they have to answer riddles. So Tolkien's riddles are they're not only rhymes but they have, like I was saying, the sound of the words seems to convey different ideas. Try to give you an example here.
Mhm.
So he's talking about, what is this? So 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. What is that? So the sound of the words has meaning. Or an eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like to this eye, said the first eye, but in low place, not in high place. So there are a lot of sounds here going on that we I think, managed to translate quite admirably. For a group of pilots, we did pretty well.
Do you have the Hebrew near you?
I do.
You want to give us a taste?
So here's the eye in a blue face. So ayin bepanim kulim ve'ita ayin bepanim yerukim. Ayin zo dumal ayin zo amar ha'ayin harishona. Ach nimtzet hi sham lemata bimkom liot ei sham lemala. So it sounds simplistic a little bit, but we struggled and we had arguments, and it was a great way to stay as sane as we could. This delving into something that wasn't in our field at all.
Would you mind reading that poem one more time? There was a plane flying overhead.
Really?
Yeah. When you're an audio nerd, you hear weird things.
Ayin bepanim kulim, rata ayin bepanim yerukim. Ayin zo dobal ayin zo, amor ha'ayin harishona. Ach nimtzet hi sham lemata, bimkom liot ei sham lemala.
Nice. It always seemed to me like there might even be some kind of bliss to just immerse yourself so deeply in something like that.
Definitely. It was certainly a getaway. The whole Tolkien experience for a number of us was a true getaway. We lived in that world that he created.
Yeah, that must have been, as a translator myself, I had heard about your story, and it always resonated so deeply with me as a getaway, like you said, as something to escape to, or a separate world to reside in for a short period or something like that.
Oh yeah, if we could have other worlds, we would do that as well. We would have done that as well.
Can you tell me a bit about the longing, or was longing something that haunted you, or was longing something that was a constant when you weren't actively doing something else?
I'm sure it was. It was for me. I think we all tried to limit the time that we had for longing to, I won't say, maybe a minimum is the right word, but to limit that time because it served a detrimental purpose for each one of us and for the group itself. People would get into moods and did not function as part of this group. I think we all saw, at least some of us saw, that being able to function as a group of individuals who have some kind of common purpose, even if it's a simplistic one. Like one of the stories I tell is about the water, our water system in Egypt. So this prison was connected apparently to the city water in the area that we're in. And when the water pressure would go down, nothing would come out. And we were only allowed the water that we had inside of our room. And when we would ask what's going on, the simplistic answer from our guards was the water's tired. It doesn't get here. There's no pressure. So in Arabic, it came out the tired water. So we complained that we don't have enough water, and the authorities in the prison decided that we couldn't be let out to go somewhere else to get our water. So they decided to install a water tank on top of our building. So when there was pressure, the pressure would fill up the water tank. It was a pretty big tank. And then we always had enough water from this tank, regardless of the system pressure. Well, the pilots among us were thinking about this, and since the system pressure was never very strong, the water tank would not really fill up enough. So it was also on the second story, so the water it was tired to get up to the second floor. So we came up with, why don't we put a hand pump in line with the pipe that goes up to the water tank, and we'll be able to pump water up there from the system. The Egyptian authorities apparently thought about that, and a few months later, a plumber showed up at in our room, and he apparently was a plumber in this prison from when the British still had their forces in Egypt from 50 years before that. A very old plumber who knew every pipe in the system and knew every faucet and everything. So he installed a hand pump, and we would then, when we were allowed outside, we would take turns pumping water to fill the tank on top of the roof. Another part of the story is that we wanted to have some kind of exercise facility to maintain our physical health. And so we asked for a stationary bike. And the Red Cross said that's a really good idea. And so someone from Israel, we think, sent a stationary bike through the Red Cross, which the first bike didn't get to us because we were told that the customs official in Egypt needed this bike, apparently. So they sent another one, and it arrived, and it was situated outside in that little courtyard area. So one day, one of us is riding the bicycle, pedaling, and the other is pumping water, and they got into the same rhythm. So immediately we saw that, what if we connect the pedal from the bike to the pump handle? Then the person riding the bike would be able to pump water, and it would serve two purposes. So this, of course, was thought of as amazing technology for the people there. And we managed to hook up an old broomstick that we were allowed with some rope to tie the pedal to the handle, and it worked. One day we were told to dress up as much as we could. By the way, we were told that we were not allowed to wear shorts and a t-shirt. We had to wear a uniform, but the only uniform that we could wear was the Egyptian army uniform, and we refused. we said, we're not Egyptian soldiers. We're not going to wear this Egyptian army uniform.
Was that also something, a
Oh.
decision that was taken by popular vote?
Oh, you have no idea how many hours of discussion went into that decision. A decision to object to what the authorities want us to do had certain possible repercussions. So we had to weigh in our own minds what, they can say, okay, either you wear that or you go naked, or you're going to do it, or I'm going to chop your toes off. Anyway, so we were told that we need to dress up nicely because an important person was coming to see us. And we knew it wasn't the Red Cross. It wasn't the time for their visit. So it turns out that I don't know the official title. It sounded to me like the governor of the Cairo area. Governor was maybe the wrong word, the mayor of the city or something, came to see somebody in the prison. There were many political prisoners that were our neighbors in the prison that we knew about. And apparently this political person who fell from on high was visited by a friend of his, and the friend also wanted to see the Israeli prisoners of war, just to say he's seen it. So he shows up in our courtyard, and somebody is riding the bike and pumping water, and he was amazed by this sight and asked if he could do that. And so we let him is the wrong word. We said, sure. So it turned out that the governor of Cairo pumped water for the Israeli POWs. And we had a ball. We laughed about that for a couple of weeks. It was pretty funny.
Did you
Nice.
say that for me again? Just shifting around in the chair in the background.
Sorry.
Which part?
Just the Israeli governor pumped
So
water.
the governor from Cairo pumped water for the Israeli POWs. We found that quite amusing.
I'm sure you did. So maybe, okay. Books wise, by the way, I'm just curious also, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, that was I know you read a ton when you were there. Can you give me your top three?
No, I can't. I don't remember the titles. As many books as we could get our hands on, we read in either stories, literature, history. We were allowed to have a copy of the Hebrew Bible while we were in solitary. After a few months, we asked for something to read and suggested the Bible, and apparently that was acceptable. So I know I read the Tanakh backward and forward for a few months. But no, I don't remember any specific titles that I can give you.
What was your favorite part of the Tanakh reading, or which parts spoke to you the most?
It is the stories. I think the prophets trying to understand where the prophets came from and what they were trying to say. And to this day, I find pleasure in reading explanations or interpretations of the actual book of prophets or different prophets in the history.
And just about The Hobbit, did you, even while you were doing it, was there did you feel proud of what you had accomplished, or
Proud is probably not the right word, but a lot of satisfaction. I think it contributed, I know it contributed to a lot of time well spent during our stay there, both for ourselves, the translators, and for those who benefited from listening to the stories that we were able to tell them in Hebrew.
I heard once, I think that not J.R.R. Tolkien, but his son
Christopher,
mentions, is it right that he
he
enjoyed
visited Israel, and I was unfortunately not able to meet with him, but Rami did. I'm not sure if Menachem did, but I know that Rami met with him in Jerusalem. He was in the country for a conference or something, and was very happy to meet a group of people who had translated his father's work. It was quite admiring of that.
And so how long after you finished the translation did you begin to feel, I know that you all realized when the war broke out that there was a good chance that you'd be heading home soon, right?
Well, since I told you the three things that would gain us freedom, the war being one of them, once the war broke out, we knew about it immediately. We heard the sirens in Cairo. And we were hopeful, more hopeful. The problem of being a POW, one of the problems is you can't be too hopeful. You can only fall from small elevation changes. If you happen to topple off a big high mountain, it really hurts. So hope was something that we kept at bay a little bit. But I was fairly sure that this would cause, we would be repatriated. And we tried to think of how we're going to bring this translation back. I don't remember how many, I think there were 7 notebooks. Avi would know. Avi was the scribe as well. So he would know how many books.
I think I heard 7 as well.
So we figured out a way that we thought they might come with us, because we weren't sure what we would be allowed to take back with us, but we did. And it was, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you knew that you would like to see them published, or if you thought maybe it was just a project you'd completed.
It was a project. We never thought of publishing it until we got back, and
The Air Force published it.
I'm trying to remember how the Air Force came to that decision to have it published. And it was the year after, it was in 1960, in 1974 or 5, that the Air Force took upon itself to have it published and to give it as a holiday present to all of the people who served in the Air Force. It was not our intent to have it published, but I think once we thought about it, we thought that that would be a very nice thing to have done.
And it was published, though, not by, maybe with the help of the Air Force, but it came out through the Kinneret Moravitan, right?
Right. The Air Force advocated, and Kinneret Moravitan agreed to publish it.
Did they edit? Did you go through an edit?
I don't think so. I'm sure there was some, possibly spelling or grammar or things, but I don't think it was changed at all from what was transcribed into those 7 notebooks.
It's a fantastic accomplishment, really. What about, do you remember? Oh, did your wife want to say something? No.
You want to say something?
Yeah, well, you know that there was an official translation that came out later. I mean, obviously they never got the copyright release to do the translation. And so there was an official translation that was done later. And Rami actually participated on a panel because they had this discussion about the official translation versus the pilot's translation. And one of the things I remember that Rami talked about was their decision about calling the people HaHobbit versus Hobbitim, or Ha'elef versus Ha'elfim. And when I was in Israel, everybody said, if you buy a translation of The Hobbit, get the pilot's translation. It's much better than the other one.
It's an interesting point. The title of the book in Hebrew is not HaHobbit, it's Hobbit. And we had discussions of in Hebrew, it didn't sound to us like it was correct to have the article the in front of Hobbit because it's the same sound in Hebrew, almost. They're both hays, the hay sound. So it's not HaHobbit, the Hobbit, it's just Hobbit.
Right. Did everybody do that? All the translators? Or was that just unique to
No,
yours?
I think ours. I don't recall if, I forgot the gentleman's name, almost something that translated the first translation into Hebrew. Used the same,
Hanami or something like that.
not sure.
Yeah.
You can find
Yeah.
that on Amazon, I'm sure.
Sure, for sure. And so did you carry the notebooks home? Do you remember voyage home?
Avi smuggled them home somehow.
They needed to be smuggled?
Oh yeah, we were not allowed. We were allowed to carry very little with us, only our personal belongings, and I think they were in the bottom. I think we had a box, a cardboard box each that we were permitted to take when we left the prison, and I think Ami upholstered the bottom part of his box with the notebooks, but I'm not 100% sure.
And do you remember the journey back?
One day, the prison commander came. This was, of course, in November of '73, 3 or 4 weeks after the war. He came and he said, "You guys are going home tomorrow." And we knew there were other Israeli POWs from the Yom Kippur War who were in the prison and who were wounded and injured and so forth. And so we got together very quickly and said, we need those who are wounded to go home first. This was supposed to be the first day of prisoner exchange with the Egyptians. So we came to a decision that we were willing to stay longer in Egypt since we were settled more or less. We had, we didn't think anything bad was going to happen if we stayed another day or two. So we asked the Egyptian authorities to send the injured Israeli prisoners on the first exchange. So we went the next day or 2 days later. I don't recall, but yeah, it's not a long flight. We got on an airplane, and an hour later we were getting off the airplane in Ben Gurion Airport, and it looked like the whole Israeli Air Force was there to welcome us. It was quite emotional.
The prime minister was there as well, wasn't she?
Golda was there, and the
Diana.
Ramatkal and the head of the Air Force and others. Of course, the families were there, and it was emotional. You can. We each, during our stay there, managed to gather together some better looking pants and shirts that we were given by the Red Cross. So each of us saved in a separate area their going home clothes. So if you see pictures of us getting off the airplane in the airport there on that day, we look pretty well dressed for POWs.
Yeah, I did see. I saw Rami in a white shirt.
Yeah, we had white shirts and pants, and the fashion of the day, our hair was, those of us who had hair was pretty long. So it was important for us to present a picture that not only gave us satisfaction, but that would show others that you could go through this kind of a ordeal and stay okay, come out of it the other side.
And would you be willing to say anything about your return? Because I know you had hardship upon return, and I know you don't want to go into it, but can you give us any kind of sense?
No, I prefer not to, Mitch.
Yeah, okay. Maybe about the children. I mean, you've missed many years. I know that was a difficult part, your daughters.
They were young when I fell, and being young 3.5 years later, they were that much older and had lived a different life.
Are you in touch with them, or?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And they live in Israel.
My oldest daughter lives in the United States. She teaches at Yale, and my second daughter lives in Israel with her family in Machon Weizmann, in the Weizmann Institute, and she works for the Department of Education as a specialized teaching person.
What are their names?
The oldest is Limor, and the second is Ayelet.
Okay. And then you have other children, right? Let's hear maybe a little bit about all of them, if you could.
Leah and I have 2 children. Our oldest is Jonathan, or Jonathan, who is soon to be a commercial airline pilot in the United States. And our daughter, Michal, is completing her doctorate in the Tel Aviv University. She lives in Israel in forensic anthropology, and she works in the, forgot the name of the, in what is known in Israel as Abu Kabir, which is the forensic medicine part of the Israeli police institution.
I have to look that up on Google each time I need to use it as well. I think it's called the Institute of Forensic Medicine.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
So she works there, and she's completing her PhD.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
In Israel. Yeah. So we're very proud.
I'm glad. Is there anything else that you want to touch on that you'd like to add, maybe?
I don't think so, Mitch. I am somewhat curious how this all is concocted together into a podcast with all my hems and haws, and
Possibly 2. episodes.
Looking for, yeah, here you go.
Well, it's a lot of work. You don't worry about anything that sounds hemming or hawing, or that all gets edited out and
Yeah.
smoothed over, and you sound good. But yes, crafting the story, I'm far from that. It's a lot of work, and
So
I'm going to be talking to some other people. Not everybody was willing. Menachem, as you know, I suppose, was not
you
interested.
told me he's not interested and or
Right, but
willing, and Esther
right, so
is.
Esther is, and so is Nurit. But Avinoam said he wanted to think it over, and he just told me today that he thinks not. That was a little disappointing for me, but I understand.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
You'll let me know when this is this is
Oh, yeah.
finished, and I'll be able to
Oh
listen
yeah,
to it.
of course, absolutely. It will take a while, and I'm sure I'll have to get
You wanna
back to
mention that
you.
You continued flying until 2017.
Oh yeah, tell me. Yeah, thank you. Did you fly combat flight again
Yes,
after that?
yes, I did. I flew combat flights after I was repatriated. Actually, I wanted to fly the next day after I got back. I think more to prove to myself. And the Air Force said, no, I have to go through some medical examinations and see if I'm fit to fly. So I did that the next day. And the following day, I was flying an F-4 again in my old squadron that I had left behind when I went to Egypt. And then I subsequently continued operational combat flying, and I became a test pilot in a year after after the war, and I was the chief test pilot in the Israeli Air Force for 6 more years until I retired from the Air Force in 1984.
How much time elapsed from your return till you flew a combat mission? Do you remember?
Less than a year.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then in the States, I know you've done a lot of test flight work as well, right?
Yes. When we left Israel in 1985, I worked as a test pilot for different organizations. The International Test Pilot School in Mojave, California for a year, and then 20 years with a flight research organization in Buffalo, New York, doing research into flying qualities and handling qualities of airplanes, and teaching at the Air Force, US Air Force, US Navy, and the French test pilot schools as an instructor for 20 years. And then we moved because of work to Colorado, and I have kept flying for civilian organizations developing transport and other kinds of airplanes until I was medically not able to fly about 3 years ago. And since then, I'm consulting. So I tell other people what they're doing wrong, which is a great, it turns out that in the flight test profession, there is a very, very large gap in knowledge between I won't say it's a large gap, that's the wrong word. There's an appreciation of experience in doing test flying that may not be found in other organizations. So smarter organizations, flight organizations, manufacturers, and so forth see the advantage, the benefit of having an experienced eye looking over what they're doing. So I like to say I'm, very good at telling other people what they're doing wrong. Not so much myself, but other people.
Okay. Is, by the way, and I'm going to let you go in another minute or two. Is there, do you feel a bond with the other people who who you were when you were in captivity with? Do you feel a bond with them? Are you in touch with them?
I would say sporadically. I think Rami and I had a special relationship, and we kept that throughout the years until his passing. The others, I enjoy very much seeing them and meeting them. I don't make a concerted effort to socialize with that group. I think for it's probably because we went through very difficult times together, and when it's not something that I need or want to dwell on. And I think seeing and talking with people, there's always the possibility of delving into things that I don't really want to bring up at this point.
Right, I understand entirely.
We were very close, all of us, but not too close. We each kept our separate little worlds, which was important for us to do.
What was in, all right, I don't want to keep you any longer. I was going to ask you what was in the separate world, but do you happen to know the name? I know the name of the Red Cross person, and do you think that person is still alive? I know his name was Bouchard or something like that.
Bouchard.
Bouchard?
Bouchard, Bussard, I believe. But I don't know if he was, Swiss. I don't know how old he was at the time, but this is 50 years later. Yeah. So I doubt that he's still alive, but maybe.
And what about Motti Bevler?
Bubler?
Yeah.
What about?
Are you in touch with him?
No, I'm not in touch with the Mottis, and
Amy would have their information.
Who?
Amy.
Menachem Amy would probably have that where they are.
Nurit might.
Yeah.
Rami's widow.
Nurit might as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to really thank you. I really appreciate it. I know it isn't easy, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. See what comes out of it, Mitch. It was. I think it's something I need to do occasionally for myself. So it was a good poke in the side for me to do this.
Okay, great. I hope that's a good way of looking at it.
Okay.
And thank you. Thank you. Say hi. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, I'll talk.
All right.
I'm done.
I'm done.
All right.
I'll go ahead and stop the recording here.
Oh, we're still not hearing you, huh? Why am I not hearing you? Doesn't matter. Are you muted?
Shouldn't be.
No. Well.
Okay. Do you hear me?
No, I don't. No, maybe it. No, I don't know why. It doesn't matter. There we go. Microphone. Let's try now. All right. Bye.
Oh, do you hear me?
Yeah,
I hear you.
That was a
Oh, you do.
setting on the computer.
Oh, okay. See,
Okay.
even the Zoom experts sometimes get. Bye, guys. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
bye, Mitch.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.